everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. This is our ID Masterclass for anyone that is new to our program today. So this is where we take the topic of the month and we dig a little deeper into it, particularly around the nuances of ID and the combination of the different drives. Generally, it's with the people who are a little more advanced in their training and experience of ID, or people who want to get to that place, particularly people who are in the coaching and consulting space, but even people who are within our client communities wanting to just get, or become more of like a champion within that community for ID and the way that it helps people live their life more in stride with who they are and able to bring out their, the best version of themselves. So with this class, what we're going to do typically is start with our peak performance check-in. So this is our in stride check-in, which is our way of calibrating and just, stepping back for a minute as we contemplate our day and sort of think about, are we actually living in stride, and could we be doing more to be more in stride by, better being more in tune with our needs of our ID. So in the chat, it's probably the easiest way to do it is just in the chat, you might just put down a score from on a scale of 0 to 10. Where would you put yourself? If you don't want to use a number and you want to use some other way to express it, that's okay too. The biggest issue is not so much the number, but what's behind the number and maybe the conversation we have afterwards. It's interesting. It's always a fairly high score, this group, which is, I guess, it makes sense to me that it would be, because it's a group that is, quite aware of their ID and what to do to stay in stride. But for those of you who might do this exercise in your teams, the real issue, the real value of this is the conversation that it provokes. Either because some people might be out of stride and they just need to share that with the team so people understand what might be behind the way they're showing up. Maybe the team can help. Sometimes it's good to share why people are 9s or 10s and what's going on for them that got to that place. That can be good for them to realize, but it be also good for others to maybe follow their lead. So I'm just going to stop for a minute and open up the discussion for anyone that would like to comment on their score, either because it's particularly high or maybe it's just different for where it was before and you'd like to comment on that. But who would like to share something about what's behind the score or the rating they gave today?
I can go. I'm an 8, and I've got a big deadline coming up, and I'm pretty excited about it and pretty enthused from a conversation with the customer that's propelling us to our next pretty challenging goal. So yeah, that's my 8.
So just to be clear, because I think someone could be on the call, the customer was Infoblox that you talking about the conversation yesterday, Tristan?
Yep.
Yeah, so that was a how would you describe it? A rolling out or a showcasing of the platform to that client, and just a very enthusiastic reception.
Absolutely, yeah. As well as a bit of a challenge as well. Really good input and ideas. We love ideas, don't we, Paul?
They really want it sooner, right?
They want it tomorrow.
and the big surprise is the total opposite of Tristan's ID, and sharing the same deadline. I'm also an 8, so that's interesting.
And why is that, Kristen? Most people would think that a deadline with maybe a little more pressure would be not taking your number up or would take it down. So what's happening for you that would take it up?
I think it is more the sort of the resilience over it. I mean, here's the thing, which I have every expectation will meet the deadline, but at the same time, and I don't know if it's just something of maturity or whatever, I just think if you don't meet the deadline, no one dies. It's like, right. That's the worst, the worst case scenario is you don't meet the deadline, and we'll do everything to meet the deadline. But yeah, and there's something that I think, you know, the team that I'm working with, you know, everyone's doing everything that they can, and so that's, you know, it would be a different scenario if, yeah, you thought people were sort of going completely off piste or whatever. I mean, that would be a whole different thing. So
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I'm a 3429. I'm very happy because I'm in New South Wales. And I've come over to see my daughter, and she's gone. So she's gone to Europe, and I'm sitting here looking. I'm here looking after the horses. So anyway, I'm in your part of the world, Paul. So
Oh, that's
good
nice,
to be
Mike.
here.
Yes, welcome. Welcome back.
Nice to be here.
I suppose for someone with your ID, so Mike, you might just share your ID for those who don't know your ID. And while I say that to you, I'm going to change mine. If you right click on your name, you can change your name so it reflects your ID. Your ID score makes it so much, you know, more effective for all of us as we're communicating with you on this call. What were your numbers, Mike?
3429.
3429. So anyone who's got a 2 and a 9, if they get a bit of variety in their life, that's a good thing. So just a change of state, I'm sure, kicks your number up, Mike. That's great. Anybody else?
Pleased to be one.
All right. Well, with that, let's move on into our discussion for today. So it's building from our last webinar a couple of weeks ago, which was on how we imagine and the link between the power of that word and our IDs. And I'm just going to show a few slides to you from that class so that it just sort of refreshes and gets us all back on the page. And then we'll take it further in our conversation today. So let me just call them up. All right. So the first thing we talked about with ID, and I think this is just an important sort of 101 to always think about with ID, is if we're going to tackle any topic, the first question that should come up is, are we in stride, first of all? No matter the nuances of our different IDs, we're always going to do it best if we come from a place of being in stride. One of the things I had here was this point that we made last week was that it's not just about, you know, being in stride so that we have less stress or our performance goes up, which is what we've always talked about with our peak performance scores. But it's this point in blue about when we're in stride and we talk about that sense of flow, it's also that our creative juices flow. And a lot of the things that might normally be a constraint don't seem to be as big a constraint. You just heard Krista say that with deadlines. You know, when you're in a good place, you tend to look at life from a more positive and healthy perspective. Even something like, well, I suppose if we don't meet it, no one's going to die. Like, let's be more realistic about it. And it just has less stress around it and allows things to flow. So that's the first thing I would say to you about if you're trying to be more creative or more positive around this area of imagining, then being in stride is the place to start. Okay, then we came up with a few different angles. I think most of our conversation in the last webinar, as we sort of introduced this topic, was the different reactions that people have to this concept of imagine. And I'm specifically calling out imagine as opposed to imagination, because imagine is the verb, whereas imagination is more the capability. It's the noun. We all can have an imagination, but how we engage it, how we get into the process of imagining, that's different for different people. In fact, some people have a negative reaction to that word. Some people said things like, well, in order to be positive about it, I've got to sort of imagine the worst things first. I've got to deal with the constraints because they're more the realistic things that I've got to go with first. And once I've got my head around those, I can then sort of get more into imagining possibilities. But not to go straight to possibilities, that feels really fanciful. And that doesn't work for me, you know. So everyone had a different approach to the concept, or different IDs have different approaches and reactions to this concept of imagination and imagining. So you can see here some of the key, I just captured from that conversation, some of the key reactions. Some of you might remember, I mean, we think about imagining as creating a picture of something. So you think that it's a natural place to go to for the authenticators. But I specifically remember some people saying, well, imagine doesn't work, but envisioning is a better word. And one of the things you'll learn as you get into ID is words matter, semantics matter. And so the word vision or creating a picture might be different to the word envision, and that's more engaging to someone. And I'm not saying that it will be true for every authenticator. It's just being aware that, you know, there are different words and concepts for the different IDs, and these were some of them. We didn't really come up with too much for the completers. So I thought I'd just stop here for a second, or for that matter, for the avoid verify, and just see if any of the completers on the call or the avoid verifiers on the call have anything that they would want to add to this list. That as you reflect on this, you know, you have something popping up that you would like to contribute. I guess you could say the same about verifiers for that matter. We only had the one comment here for verifiers. So I'm thinking about Karen, Steve. I saw Amanda before. Is there anything, you guys as completers, what's your reaction to this? Are there key words that or reactions that you would want to share?
Consequences is a word that comes up for the.
What is it, Krista?
Consequences. So obviously if someone says imagine, and then you start playing it out, the impacts of what you're imagining on everything else.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say that's the step. It's playing out all the steps to get there. So when you see that, like, you know, for as I use complete, not use authenticate, you can see all the steps and how it's unfolding. That helps with the imagine. But if you can't see how to get there, then I think that blocks the imagination or imagining.
Well, and I know from, I mean, you and I have had this conversation, Ian, and I know it's true with other completers. You've got to sometimes stop yourself from getting into the planning, right? Like when it's in that brainstorming, imagining mode, you're wanting to be in that conversation, but your mind just instinctively keeps going into, but how are we going to get there? But how are we going to get there? And it's holding back on the how to stay in the brainstorming, imagining phase.
But also, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead, Krista.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that. So I think there's two things there, as in the planning phase, which is, you know, holding that off. But it's also, if you imagine X, well, that's X, that's great. But it's having to sort of switch off. Yeah, but if you achieve that, what's that going to mean for that and for that? You know, which I think it's a little bit of a difference between, so you're holding off the planning and you're holding off the, let's just put the rest of the world aside for a moment and focus on this one thing. Yeah. So
it would feel a very unnatural thing to do then, I guess.
Yes.
Unless you can imagine at all. Unless the imagining includes all the consequences and the planning.
Or again, I think this is where if people set up a scenario or a situation, you know, if you're thinking of like working with a team or whatever, if you're sort of, you know, it can take someone to say, you know, okay, right, we're going to do this exercise. We want you to think about this. I want you to put everything else aside. You know, that can be challenging for some of us, but and imagine everything else is going to be taken care of. Nothing's going to be negatively impacted, you know, and just think about this. Then I think you can do that. It's still hard. It's not like an on-off button, but I think setting up that scenario in which it's kind of safe to imagine is helpful.
Because this is where I think then the drives sort of start to compete a little bit, because like Greg put a comment about is it a worrisome word? I mean, I think my avoid authenticate, that's part of it. Is fun, it is enjoyable, it's not worrisome, or it's almost like the complete adds the worry to it if we can't see how it's going to play out. But the avoid authenticate's always into, you know, possible, you know, what could be. And whereas I think sometimes it's almost, and then the complete avoid improvise has a combination, plays out as well.
Since my combination of resistant, I'm a 3-4-2 incomplete and 9 and improvise. I think I'm imagining all the time. I'm not stuck on thing. I need variety, and I'm drenched with ideas. So imagination is natural all the time.
Mike, is it almost the opposite for you in that, are you imagining too much? Does it feel like, in the same way some people might say, well, it's hard for me to get into the imagining space, do you spend so much time and energy there that it almost feels like you've got to stop yourself from doing it to be more realistic, or to be more present, or more focused on what is here and now? Or how is that for you?
Absolutely. And when you look at the drive to improvise, one of the assets of that is, or need, is simplicity. And yet, because of the imagination, all the ideas I have, I actually create complexity. I've often looked at that and thought, and being aware of it, I think, is helpful. But I dive into so many different things at once. I still do that, even though I've been doing this for a long time. So I have a virtual vulnerability there, but at least knowing this helps me to analyze that and to pull myself up, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And Karen, were you going to share something before?
Yeah, I was. And it's interesting, as I'm sitting here thinking of how I'm constructing my thought, the word imagine, I keep saying it over and over, and my chest kind of is getting tight. I just want to say that because I didn't realize it made me anxious. But what I was going to say is, I think my avoid authenticate and my avoid improvise end up holding me back in terms of imagining, because as I'm thinking of this new move into our home, and we had nothing when we moved into it because we didn't expect to be moving. And so there was this part of me, I'd like start to imagine a room, and then I'd start getting caught on, and this sort of the avoid authenticate comes in, like, okay, who could do that? Who's the best person to do that? Like, where's the best place to, like, there's so much going into my floating up here and trying to find the best way, right, by use verify, to complete that room. And then there's, risk of not having it ready or not having the money for the right kind of things that we want, so then I get stuck in a single room. Can't even move beyond the whole house, right? There's not a, I get stuck in the like chairs, like we need chairs, right? So I'm not up here looking at the full picture. I'm using our house as an example because it's very fresh, but like, what do I want imagine the whole home to look like? Because I'm still stuck in the family room right now. And the chairs.
Does that work then? If you're imagining the whole, is that better for you than imagining one room?
It's interesting because even as I said it, there was almost a release. Like, if I could just think, like, the whole room, the whole house needs to be, I'd like it to have a Southwestern feel. Then I can lean into it, right? But I don't have the whole, and so I can get stuck in the minutia, in the weeds, as we say, instead of the imagine, right?
So that might be the trigger for a completer, is to look at the whole picture rather than just the picture, because what I heard them saying before was, if we've got to ignore certain parts that are all connected, it sort of feels unrealistic. Whereas if we can factor all that in together, that becomes something that's more possible.
Yeah.
Steve, you made a comment. I'll just ask you this and then we'll move on to digging into today. You made a comment to Greg's answer about it. It felt like you put the word criticism.
Yeah, sorry, wasn't directly related to Greg, but more my biggest challenge is in brainstorming sessions, and I'm actually quite good at looking at the bigger picture, but it's actually due to detailed thinking and a completer being critical or coming across with conversation, and you talked about words before, that it can come across as being critical or criticism when engaged. So I've got to be very careful selecting the right words to encourage and inspire further conversation in the bigger picture, because it's very, very easy when you think through everything to shut down things without just subconsciously and not knowing you're doing it.
Okay. Well, I know that's a good call out, because I know that for other people who are into that, process of imagining, if they start getting too many questions about the thing, or too much focus on the consequences or how we're going to do the planning, in that moment it does come across as not just negative. It's like a wet blanket, because it stops the conversation that was all about the brainstorming of the future possibilities.
Yeah, and it can be taken a little bit as being arrogant in situations. So that's another byproduct of it.
Okay.
Mm.
All right. Well, this is just a level set where we left off last time, guys. So today we're going to sort of put it to work a little bit. Let me, I've got a couple of questions that I was going to use to provoke our conversation. And I actually meant to just ask before, because this is our masterclass, does anybody have anything on their minds? And there might be a completely separate topic. I just want to sort of table it if you do. Does anyone have anything they particularly like to ask of the group today? Is there something on your mind, a challenge you're facing, a decision you're contemplating that, you're thinking about that from the point of view of your ID and wondering, or wanting the help of the group, either just to share it or to get the, the brains trust from the group? Does anyone have a topic on their mind they'd like to discuss? All right, so if something comes up, put it in chat. Our topic for today is about imagining. So my first question that I had was, do you actually spend time doing it? And if you do, where do you spend the bulk of your time? Is it, and I just put up some things here. So when you are thinking about this question for yourself, where do you spend? If firstly, you may not. So it may not be something you do. Fine. If you do spend time imagining, do you spend a lot of time doing it? Is it, where is the focus? Is it future or past? Is it work or personal? Is it mostly around concerns, or is it more free and optimistic? Like, where is it? And what's the connection that you see between where you spend the bulk of your time with it and your ID? And if it's something you don't do too much, how do you see that connected to your ID? And as you comment, those of you who are a little more advanced, you might, for the benefit of others, share it from a combination point of view or an intensities point of view of your ID. So not just one drive, but how you see maybe your whole ID at play here. And I will just kick off maybe what you're thinking. When I thought about this for myself, I definitely spend time imagining. I'm not sure if it's a lot of time. It probably is. How do you measure a lot? I would say it's a frequent thing for me, as in probably daily and often through the day. It would be definitely future focused. I'm not really one to go back and imagine that things could have been different. It's even though I'm a verifier, I don't really, spend time about, how my life could have been different. It just is what it is. I find invariably it's definitely future focused. It's probably more, I was going to say work, but it's actually just as much, probably 50-50 work and personal. And it's always very positive. I'm not imagining anything negative. It would all be about the positives. And the only thing that's a surprise to me in all of that is I would have thought with my ID, and I will give it more thought because I think that is my ID. I would have spent more time maybe thinking backwards, like more about the past being a verifier, but I don't go there so much. And maybe as I hear from other people today, it might give me an additional perspective as to why I do or don't, or the value in doing so or not, so I'm curious what other people might want to share here too. So Karen, I just saw you comment in the chat. It's not something that comes up automatically. You actually make time to do it.
Yes, otherwise it turns into just a hamster rave in my head of thoughts, as opposed to, I schedule time, whether it be for meditation or just for quiet time. And honestly, some of my most, and I know imaginative thinking is done on planes, because I'm an extrovert but I don't talk to people on planes. I just kind of go into the cone. And so I've used that as a reference point for myself when I'm feeling stuck, that I make sure that I institute practices that are, where I have quiet space on a regular basis. And it just, imagining just kind of becomes part of that. And,
Okay.
but I know I need structure, right? Which fits my ID.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how it plays out even when you're doing something that is not, it's not real, it's not like you're using it today, it's just imagining, but you still need intention and structure to do it and not be sort of confused by it. And Glenn, I see your comment's interesting. So when you're imagining, it's more around your feelings than a picture. Isn't that interesting? We can't hear you, Glenn. Doesn't show you as on mute, but we can't hear you. Does someone else want to go while Glenn's looking at her audio?
Well, Paul, I just added in the chat, just following Glenn, that my imagining is always very, very visual. If I don't have a picture to move around in my head, I'm not imagining things. Almost always future focused and almost always very positive. Sometimes the negative thoughts sink in, but mostly very positive.
And so, Cliff, as an authenticator, you spend a fair bit of time imagining. That's like a key part of your makeup.
Yep, I would say it's daily, but it's much more pronounced. It's almost always something that I'm trying to figure out how something works or wonder about something. So it's almost always a reaction to something that I'm seeing, and it is very, very application based, I think you could probably say.
Okay.
I was just looking at Greg, you made a comment that to some extent isn't all thinking, imagining, and I was trying to sort of see if there was some kind of difference. So, obviously, particularly with complete avoid improvise, a lot of sort of thinking ahead, and that is kind of planning. I think the difference is if someone says imagine to me, that's a different kind of thinking or planning. So that there is something that is not the usual stuff that you'd be doing anyway. It's something that's beyond that. So I do think all the times where we think ahead is some kind of imagining, but then there's this other thing that is the more directive, call to imagine, which is, oh, okay, so that's not just that stuff. This is something completely new and different than what you already had in your head.
So thank you, Krista. I'm interested if there's someone, Greg, you might ask this as well. Is there someone who would say they don't spend much time, if at all, imagining?
Hey everyone, I'll answer to that one, Greg.
Enter Amanda.
Yeah, I've been watching all this and thinking, imagine, like I already have enough people around me imagining things. So to me, imagine means planning and executing something and having to think of all the negatives and how can I avoid risk, right? As an avoid improviser. So to me, I'm always already spending a lot of my thinking time on what do I have to do, what I have on my plate at the moment, what are my tasks for the day, what do I have to do right here, right now, or what's coming up in the future that I have to prepare for, that I don't have much time left for imagining, So, yeah, that's it, Greg. I think I'm that person. I'm sorry to bring in a sad perspective for everyone.
I don't think it's sad at all. Look, I'm just saying that your imagining is that worrying, and if you really could control imagining, then you would change the way you worry. It's like, meaning, imagine if I could make this better. Imagine, like, aren't we thinking of the past, replaying it, and worrying about the future? Isn't that all in our imagination? Isn't that all made up anyway? And what if we knew what we were doing it and we could just reimagine it? And if like the old saying, we can be anything we want. Well, why don't we be happy? You know, it's like, let's imagine. So I'm hearing all these different definitions people are saying of imagine, and I don't know that we're all talking about the same thing. So I'm just saying, you guys who think you don't imagine, I'm saying I bet you are. But what are you imagining, and can you control that? That's the point of that. That's all. I can't hear anything now.
I know. I was just letting the stillness be there, Greg. I mean,
Okay.
I've wondered that. I've wondered that myself. I mean, even when people are, you know, if you think about imagining, as it's another way of saying is conjuring up something, even focusing on the fears, or, you know, there's the perceptions that people have, even they are imaginings. So I've wondered whether we all do it, but don't realize we're doing it, or is it just we have different words for it? Because, and the reason I think it's important is I see a lot of people who draw a conclusion, and I guess it was emphasized even, Amanda, when you said, you know, sorry, I don't do it. There is a certain stigma about imagination and creativity and innovation, and the people need to be imagining. And there are a bunch of people who either don't feel good about it, like they feel like they're either it's not where they play, you know, it's not something they're good at or they spend time doing. But or you get people like Mike said before, I do too much of it. You know, it's instead of it, even though it comes naturally, it's so natural and it's so effusive that I've got too much of it. It turns my life from simplicity to, you know, complexity. And is that a good thing? So it can be a very, I think for a lot of people, a very positive and empowering thing to do. It's certainly the key to a lot of innovation. It's the key to creating a future that's different, and getting out of any inertia that people feel they're in. A lot of people say, I feel like I'm in a rut. And so they want to imagine. That's the first step of getting out of that. Is that different to planning to get out of it? Maybe we're using different words to mean the same thing. I don't know, but I know there's a stigma about it on something that could potentially be very powerful to imagine success, imagine happiness, imagine love, you know, imagine optimism. I mean, we all ultimately want to go there. I think how we get there is different.
Well, can I just mention that the word imagine, I mean, every time somebody uses it, it almost just creates this block in my head. I mean, when I was a kid, I actually spent a huge amount of time imagining, and I've spent a lot of time playing on my own and just, you know, just playing in the dust, essentially, with Lego cars and just, you know, imagining an enormous amount of things. But since I've grown older, I've seemed to have either lost that language or lost that way of thinking, or I feel like I think I use probably different words. So it's like I'm thinking, planning in the moment, and I'm not conscious of actually spending time imagining. And the word imagine to me, yeah, it's not that it's got a stigma attached so much. Well, maybe it has. Maybe it just feels to me like it's wasting time and I just need to get on and do stuff. And I think that comes back to my need to do and to think of things in the moment, which is what I tend to do. The only the only time I would probably imagine is something. I think about stuff and imagine if I can actually visually see it, it's likely to happen. If I can't literally see it, it's probably not likely to happen. So I don't know whether that's a creation thing or what, but anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to move on to the second question that I had here for you. Imagine your life 10 years from now. where do you go to next? And the key word is next. So what's your instinctive reaction to when you think about your life 10 years from now, you imagine that, where do you go to next? And what's the connection between what happened just then for you, where you go to, and your ID? Is there a connection? And how would you explain it?
Yeah. I just feel 10 years is a long time, Paul.
Okay, for you, Mike, 10 months, 10 weeks.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I know that I think 3 to 5 years is good. 10 years stretching it out, yes, it's a long time to look ahead. But
it is, and I specifically used it because of that comment from Bill Gates years ago when he said,
right.
we way overestimate what we think we're going to achieve in 2 years, but we completely underestimate where we're going to be in 10 years' time. And so for so many people, whilst 10 years can feel somewhat fanciful or in terms of whatever you're imagining, there's every chance it could become not only real, but underscoped. You know, you well overachieve it. So I was really curious as to how people see that time frame. So for you, it makes sense to me that you would see it as way too far away. And you might say, Mike, for you with your ID, for you to do the equivalent of a 10-year, you know, contemplation, you might say that for me, Paul, needs to be 10 days or, you know, 10 weeks or 10 minutes. I don't know, but it might need to be recalibrated. That might be the very point for you is, you know, where did you go to next? Well, it disengages me because it's too far away. I need to bring that down much, much shorter to really invoke the same type of reaction as someone else might have to thinking about that, you know, 10-year window.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a look at a period with a bit 3 to 5 years and say what would be, how would I be both personally and professionally happy with my progress from here? I think progress is an important one for my drive.
Okay.
For me, Paul, what it does is it's a dream to me, right? And that's what comes to my head. It's like, well, we could do anything in 10 because I know what I can do in 3 months, you know. And then I'd be like, well, what am I going to do in the next 3 months if that's where, you know, if that's such a dream? I'm like, well, it's got to be possible because I've thought about that, you know. I've paid it attention enough to think that that's where I could be. So, well, what am I doing right now? So I don't think about it as in here's my plan to get there. It's I think about it like anything's possible in 10 years. So why not start doing something about it, you know? And I've done that in my life as well. I've thought about, you know, something fanciful that I just never could have achieved. You know, my first CIO job when I think I was 18 or 19, and I was like, you know what, why not? And it kind of had guided me. It was almost like a guide rather than a plan to get somewhere, you know. It was just a guiding thing that was that making progress to something that I thought never possible. That's how I think about it when I'm posed with that kind of question.
Well, I mean, you say it sort of invokes you to the 10-year contemplation invokes you to actually deal with the here and now differently, you know, because if it opens up that possibility, then you can sort of go, well, what do I do today to make that more possible? Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, Greg, you've gone where I was going to take the conversation later, which was if this is true about the future, one way of thinking about that is go back 10 years ago and think, well, not only are you where you thought you might be, or how different is that, but how did you get here? Was there an imagining that took place? Or was it just a happenstance? You know, that my life, I just reacted and said yes and no to different things along the way, and here I am, and or was it because there was a level of imagining that went on, even for you, Amanda? You know, I don't know. It'd be really interesting to know, when you think of it in that context, go back 10 years. I mean, for me, I would have had, there's no way that I would have thought I'd be where I am today at one level. And yet, in terms of my directional journey, it's all about what I imagined. There are definitely elements of it that I imagined, and so I'd say I'm ahead of where I imagined in some things. I'm way behind what I was imagining in others. So, you know, in lots of ways, it's a mixed bag for me.
Paul, I would think I'd be interested to hear from other, you know, avoid improvisers and verifiers and completers, but the ones that have strong drives like mine, I would think we have a really good idea of where we want to be 5 or 10 years from now. And, you know, if I think back 10 years, I already imagine, you know, by this age that I am now, I'll be married, I'll have, you know, I'll start having children, and I'll be working in an office, and that's always what I've wanted to do. And that's where I am. Not all details are exactly like that, but that's where I imagine my life would be like, and it is. So, you know, I know where I want to be in 10 years, and yeah, I don't know if that's just an avoid improvise or a completer, but for the improvisers, I think it's a bit more difficult because you think in shorter terms, right? Like Joe was saying. So yeah.
What's your confidence, Amanda, that you'll be where you think you'll be in 10 years' time? When you think about 10 years out, how confident are you that that's where you'll be?
I'm very confident. I've got a goal, and I have a plan, and I'm keep it pretty simple as well. I'm not saying it'll be, you know, something crazy. It's just all I want is, you know, have my family and be in a house, and, you know, that's it. It's not super complicated, and it's not. I've scoped it out well, I think. So I think I'll get there.
Good for you.
Paul, Steve here. Just that question going back 10 years ago. Interesting. Being high and complete 10 years ago, I did a major career change, went from tier 1 sales into operations. And that decision for a completer was way out there. I had no idea. But then the end result will be like yourself. It was the planned decision. I did training and other things. And the end result of where I am today exceeded my expectations. But it also bounced off some decisions of 3 years earlier. So it was a little bit by design. Some of it was right timing, right positioning, but certainly the journey 10 years ago, did I think I'd be where I am today? No, but decisions made 10 years ago were the right ones, which is interesting because my position now I can look 30 years ahead as a completer, not fully, like Amanda, not fully detailed, but I have an outline. Of course, my career journey is within 2 years, I'll be retired from full-time employment. So my comment about sailing into the future, I'm looking at the retirement things and how to fund that and what we're going to do, and looking at legacy and that sort of stuff in the community. So there is an outline, and again, there's someone talked about visualization before, some visualization of what that might look like. So in the midst of all that sort of stuff, and both deliberate sitting down, thinking through it, and then other times just when I'm doing routine activities, ideas and thoughts come to mind, and I capture those, and I've learned to capture those and nurture them. If they fulfilled to something, great. If they don't, not a problem.
Thank you. Thank you. But it sounds very much like the planning, you know, the planning follows very closely to the imagining for a completer. It's got to be in the plan.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I feel too incomplete. It's very hard for me to have a plan. If I think of 5 years and vision that and want to make it a reality, that can be quite exciting. I find that exciting, but then you've got to manage the tension that can create as well, I think.
So what with the exciting is the possibilities, Mike, but the tension is now having to do things to get there.
Yes, you've hit the nail on the head there. The natural thing is that, and there is a model here somewhere, but creating a vision, you have a plan, but there will be tension created out of that, and then you need to manage the emotions that creates to complete the plan, if we can call it a plan. Yeah.
I think the key for an avoid completer is to identify what's the trigger, what's the one thing you can do that if you did that thing, you've now invoked that vision. You know, so like what rather yeah, how can I put it? Like if I go back to me thinking about asking Susie to marry me, right? I was well aware that that decision is going to change my life. I didn't need to plan everything out, but if you take that one step, everything, like, it's a game changer. Everything changes from there. And I think for the avoid complete, it's like identifying what's the one conversation, the one action you can take, the one thing you can do that it's like jumping off the cliff. Because once you've kicked it into play, there's no turning back. And then if you don't have a plan, you'll keep figuring it out as you move along, but at least you're not in an inertia anymore. You're not just sitting there sort of thinking about it, or, you know, it's futuristic. You're off and running, even if you haven't got the actual plan in place.
Yeah, and it needs to be, for my drive, it needs to be impressive and new, shiny and new.
And exciting. So if you're contemplating,
exciting.
as an example, if you're contemplating a future career move and you weren't sure what to do, one of the things that might kick it right into play is resign. Just resign, you know, because you can't live on nothing. And by resigning and going out cold, you have to figure out something. In fact, we had dinner with a friend last night and she's just changing jobs, starts a new job on Monday. And she said, I actually resigned with nothing to go to, you know, because I knew that would provoke a change, and that's what I wanted more than anything. So it's finding that one thing, and it's sometimes an action, sometimes it's a conversation, but it's what do you need to do to pull the trigger.
Well, one of the triggers is to get rid of what you were doing, which is what I've done with the estate planning.
Okay.
And then to focus on the ID.
Krista.
I think if I just sort of, I feel it comes like more from the, you know, avoid, improvise, really. But I think, you know, thinking, you know, back a very, very long time ago to a big sliding doors moment at a personal level, when there was so much about my ID, you know, I knew what I was going to do was going to cause not just myself a lot of upset by doing it, but it was going to upset others. It was going to put me under a lot of pressure financially. There was a lot of, you know, my career was going to go kind of out the window, all these things, but I wasn't happy, you know, and and I'm sure I didn't articulate it in this way at the time, but obviously with the hindsight of knowing my ID, I think the greater risk was not taking action. And so, you know, and it involved me, you know, leaving a relationship and going to live abroad for a while. But it was the thing that triggered it was the you know, inaction was the greater risk. And then I did what you described there, as in the thing that was going to change everything. But first of all, there had to be that tipping point that was, if I don't do this, and again, playing out consequences the rest of my life or whatever, this is just going to be bad. You know, I only get this one life kind of thing. And then I did something that made me not able to go back on that decision.
It's interesting, Krista, even though you're saying you know, the risk of staying the same was greater than the risk of taking action.
Mm.
Before that was still that you'd played it out so that it even shaped the risk. You know, it was the playing it out that helped define the risk of staying the same.
Yeah.
Glenn, you raised a really great question, which I think is, which you've got in the chat, which is a great question for, I think, for a lot of people that have a more reactive type of ID, like yours. So it's not just people who are 70 and verify, but anyone who's, you know, an avoid verify person is typically more reactive than planful. And so, you know, how does someone like that live a life that isn't just reacting, and Glenn's point about reacting to the wind, but having something that's more intentional? Anyone got any suggestions on what they've done, if you've got a similar idea or what you've seen others do? And Glenn, you might even want to comment on it to help shape this for people. Do you feel that with where you've gotten to with your life, it's been more a case of just reacting to opportunities and you know, reacting to life, or has it been planful? And if it's been planful, does planful not work for you, and being more reactive actually is working for you?
Can you hear me now? Is my sound
we
working? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I used the question posed of, if you look 10 years back, where were you?
Yep.
No, I was living in the UK. I was happily married. Hadn't anticipated my life, you know, was going to change so dramatically that I'd end up moving across the other side of the world and starting all over again. The one thing that was clear then was I did have I would say Australia was always a dream. You know, I had a dream of living and working in Australia, and I didn't know how to make that possibility for many years. And I'd sort of shelved it and gone, okay, right, you know, I'm just going to live the life in England that I had and not move here. And then ironically, when circumstances changed, it was just that one thing of, okay, well, maybe now's Australia, and then everything aligned and it all happened. And it was that was the one thing as a dream or a thought that was intentional, but I still didn't really know how that was going to come about. But where I see my 70, I struggle with is, for example, strategy days and business planning days. You know, I've got my own business focus and even just life planning. You know, when they say, oh, imagine 3 years out, where do you want your business to be? What's going to be happening? And I'm like, oh my God. And then, you know, people give you a few moments. I'm like, I have no idea how to go that far out and see what's going to happen. And I always feel like I leave those strategy days or life planning days feeling really frustrated that I somehow don't have the skill or the capability to do something that is so valuable in my eyes, you know, to be able to have that clarity and to have that opportunity to go, okay, now I know what I'm going to do next, as opposed to this wishy-washy way of navigating life, which can serve me from an adaptability perspective. But when you're actually trying to be intentional about growth and what you're trying to achieve, I find I don't know how to leverage my ID for strength, rather than just be aware that it's got a massive limiting factor to it as well.
Or is it? You know, I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking several things. One is how cool that you can share all that here, and just that we have this community of safety, that people can be so vulnerable and authentic about something that I think not only is it good for you to share it, but I know many people would feel the same way, Glenn. So good on you for sharing it. But I'm really wondering whether there's a stigma, very much a stigma, I believe there is, about living life with intention versus living life reactively. That the better way to do it, you know, the more responsible way to do it, the more mature way to do it, is to live with intention, that you would think ahead and you would work towards something, as opposed to reacting to what life dishes up. And yet when you think about it, I mean, so many people have seized the best opportunities because they did react. You know, they seized a moment where something happened out of the blue and they said yes. And it was unexpected, not only for them, but maybe for others. And yet it led to like unbelievable opportunities for them, you know? So I'm wondering whether just even the contemplation that you have is like a baggage thing that's, you know, what's been sort of drilled into you of what we should be doing. If you look at how your life has gone, being reactive, has it worked? You know, maybe it's just purely a stigma thing rather than something that you need to try and change in yourself. The change might be one more about just coming to a place of acceptance that not only is it okay, it's actually your formula for success.
Yeah, and I'll also a 70 and improvise. I've had the same experiences and would love to talk to you more about this, Glenn. But those moments of, oh, that's an interesting thought. When I look back, I can see those are the quote plans that have played out. I was struggling at the beginning of this conversation with, well, what does imagine mean? I don't find that I imagine stuff, but I can see those glimpses of, oh, that was an interesting thought. That was an interesting thought. That was an interesting thought that has now played out in my life. But those times where I've had an interesting thought and I've actually gone after it, where I've created a prescriptive plan, was so painful and so horrible and literally took a decade to get there instead of other people taking 3 or 4 years to get there. So the plan literally made it impossible for me. And it didn't happen until I let go of the plan. And I said, okay, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And so I had to shift my thinking and let go of the plan. The plan was what was getting me stuck, but letting go of the plan and just kind of going with the flow are the things that have really worked for me. And when I look back, I'm like, thank goodness that I did that for 95%, and that other 5% is a huge lesson for me. So
Thank you.
Well said, Davey. And, you know, I even picked up as you mentioned the word glimpses. Maybe for someone who's a 70 improvised, and even like with Mike, you before, maybe even glimpses is the better word. That's still an imagining. It's just a very short term imagining as opposed to something that's more detailed or more, you know, complex. You know, it's just a glimpse. That's still a form, right? And you might do more of that. So look, a key takeaway for me from this is this very last point of the discussion, Glenn, that you raised, which is, I think there really is, I think there's a lot of stereotyped, you know, expectations and stigmas still about style differences. And one of them is that it's better to plan and have intention and set goals. And I would say it's good to dream. I mean, you use the word having a dream. It was Australia was a dream. And I'm wondering whether dreams feels very much like, for someone who said it's more about the feelings, a dream feels very much like a combination of picture and feelings. You know, it's a dream. And if that's all it was, but maybe that was everything you needed to provoke a change. And if you look at your life down and say, well, I love my life, and maybe you don't, so I don't know, you have to go there. But if you love it, it's like maybe it's you're loving it because you're following your dream, and how you're getting to that dream and how you've done it is just reacting and seizing opportunities along the way. I know there are lots of people who have a completer style ID who, and I mean, you know, whether it's a Karen or whether it's Amanda, but Steve, you know, who wish that they were more opportunistic at times and seized, like reacted to something, whether it's an invitation out for dinner or whether it was a relationship or whether it was a job opportunity, but that they wish they could have pivoted in the moment and reacted as opposed to staying with their plan. It would make them feel like their lives would have been a little richer. And yet that could be the opposite stigma for them. The richness comes because you have stuck to a plan and you are ticking those boxes, you know, but we've just like ID, we've got to learn to be in awe of people who do it differently without wanting to try and change and become that ourselves.
Yeah, Paul, there was a lady called Susan Jeffers. She wrote a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I think depending upon your drive, the doing it anyway is the subject, is the challenge.
Yeah, very popular book. Well, guys, with that, we've run out of time today, but another great discussion. Thank you for being here and sharing your honesty. Lynn, you represent the whole spirit of what this community is about. You know, the safety that we create for each other to have such honest, open, authentic conversations, and in doing so, help us all, you know, continue to learn how to be better versions of ourselves. So thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you next time. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.